what would you do with your life if you had never heard of money, and if failure was not if there was no possibility of failure? That's called a powerful question, or a magical question. What would you do with your life if you'd never heard of money and failure were not, it was impossible to fail?
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who's out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode. Hey, welcome to the podcast. Bob Nickman here. I'm glad you're listening in. That gentleman you heard at the beginning there is Robert Birnberg, and I'm talking to him in Australia. Well, he's in Australia. I'm not. And we had a nice, long talk. We have a mutual friend who turned me on to Robert and his long lifetime study of yoga. And we talk about the differences between what yoga actually is and the way most of us have learned to view it. And it's, well, just listen into that part because it's very different than what I thought too. So that eventually dovetailed for him into the study of positive psychology, and how those two things connect is something that Robert does beautifully. Talks about that and how he uses both of those things in his practice for yoga therapy and positive psychology. We also get into some talk about psychedelics and the limitations they have in achieving any kind of lasting consciousness, of course, but he's a really interesting guy. He's had a colorful life, and I enjoy talking to him a lot. So listen in. This is Robert Birnberg in Australia. The first thing I want to ask you about is positive psychology.
Sure.
The reason I'm asking that is just the word positive pisses me off. I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding you. I have a real, it's one of my big sort of hurdles to overcome in life. I get a little bit of more a juice out of the darker negative side, and I've always been that guy, and I really have to work very hard to be positive, and I do. But man, that negative side, I'm going to tell you something. I'll be totally honest, man. It feels more true, and I don't like that because it's, you can't have one without the other. I realize that, and my life is better when I go with the positive. And yet, there's some part of my brain that goes, "Don't get too happy down that road."
That's that sort of fear of Pollyanna, the fear of being the Pollyanna syndrome, right?
Yeah.
So here's the story about positive psychology. There's room, first of all, there's still hope for you. That's the good news. Let's go back to the beginning of psychology in the West. It was originally the study of the human mind, its potential, and its problems, right? And that was William James or Henry James, one of the James brothers, Jesse James, one of those James brothers who wrote he was the father of Western psychology, who wrote the varieties of religious experiences. And so that's how it started. After World War II, the only people who got funded for psychological studies were people who studied pathology.
Now I'm hearing your little yappy dog in the background.
I am hearing her too there. Hold on one sec.
So we're back and we're talking positive psychology. And neither one of us got angry at that. How about that?
See, some of the stuff works a little. But the truth about positive psychology, the way I understand it, is that it's so after World War II, the only people who got funded were people who studied pathology. Not surprisingly, this is in the face of the burgeoning pharmaceutical industry. So now people are getting paid to study what's wrong with people. And those are the studies that got funded. So this went on for years and years, from the 40s till about 17, 18 years ago. a man named Martin Seligman, who's became the head of the American Psychological Association. And he said he posed this question to the community at large: what happened to the other part? Why aren't we studying? Now, to be fair, in the late '60s, early '70s, there was the humanistic psychology movement, and these were people like Gene Houston and R.D. Laing and Abraham Maslow, who studied. Who explored human potential, but I would say they did more acid than studies, than actual data. They didn't collect a lot of data, and data matters.
So they were experimenting with psychedelics, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was that was 1969 was when the human potential movement sort of peaked. I think it's fair to say, or it was going strong around then. It was the summer of love. There was a lot of personal exploration in the air. They were studying pathology and they were studying behaviorism. So that's the external, what people do, what they say. People took acid and people had these other great insights. They started to look at, instead of behavior, consciousness. What's it feel like? Not what is the rat doing when you or the dog doing when you ring the bell, but how does it feel to be? What's it like to be? The entity that perceives, what is that all about? Let's look at that for a while and not how it behaves. So it became more about subjective, right, experience. And so, that phase, that was a short-lived deal, because again, there's no data. No one would fund the brief period while LSD was being funded. It was largely for military use, right? The CIA funded all this LSD research.
There's actually some really interesting footage on YouTube of Army run LSD experiments. There's 2 or 3 I've seen where they. Yeah. It's pretty funny because it's in black and white, and there's this one woman who's like a housewife. I guess she's the wife of one of the guys that worked at the lab or something, and you watch her progress over time while she's in a very straight-laced kind of conservative, middle American woman on LSD. It's a really interesting piece of footage. I can't think. It's just, if you just go on YouTube and look up Army LSD experiments, you can see some.
And that was pre Timothy Leary, who brought in the idea of set and setting, which mindset and like the room you're in. So it said like, well, you're going to have a different experience depending on what mindset you bring to the LSD. So you wouldn't just pick random people and put them in a room and dose them. You would pick people who had a reason to do it, or there was some sort of they were looking for something. So that was the mindset that he said was important to have. And then there was the setting, which is, in a room with beanbag chairs and music playing and incense burning. And I don't believe the CIA did their experiments that way.
The one I watched was a guy, and it was a doctor in a white lab coat in a very stark medical room, and the woman's in a chair, and they're just having a very regular old discussion. And she's describing her experience, what she's seeing and feeling. It's pretty interesting. She's not afraid. She's not anything. She's just sort of going along with it.
So back to positive psychology, Martin Seligman said we should be studying this other part, like not just the disease, the pathology. And by then, pathology was king. There was that time the DSM-4. I think we're now up to the DSM-6, but it's basically a catalog of personality disorders and problems and diseases and mental aberrations. And so what Seligman said was, what about taking, for instance, antidepressants will take somebody from a -15 to a -5. But nobody's ever taken Zoloft and gone, oh boy, my life has meaning. It has purpose. Now I know why I'm here. I love everyone. I know what I'm going to do. And that's never happened. maybe they don't want to kill themselves, and maybe they can get themselves to therapy, but it's not meant to take you into the positive zone. It's sort of to bring you up and keep you alive long enough so that talk therapy will kick in. That was actually originally, if you recall, the whole thing with antidepressants was short-term interventionary and rarely prescribed. That's changed quite a bit, right? Now they're sort of widely prescribed and for the rest of your life. So, so Martin Seligman said, yeah, let's study. And Martin Seligman's true genius was getting funding, because there had been isolated psychologists like Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, who was studying flow, the experience of that artists, I think artists, athletes, and surgeons have most frequently, which is where they go into a state where they're engaged, totally engaged. In yoga, by the way, that's called samadhi. In positive psychology, it's called flow. One of my character strengths, and so positive psychology studies things like character strengths. Like those are things that people are innately good at. They're just born that way, and that are energizing, right? And you can go online. There's tons of character strength studies if you're interested in finding out what your character strengths are. But one of my character strengths is synthesis. I'm really good at seeing the parallels between yoga and the Yoga Sutras and positive psychology, or Yoga Sutras and the 12-step program, or positive psychology and quantum physics, or just I just see it. I mean, if you just, it's kind of one of those things that comes easy. So Seligman got all these different people who were doing, a guy named Ed Diener was studying subjective happiness at Southern Illinois, University of Illinois. And so he got all these people together under the umbrella of what he called positive psychology, right? And probably much like you, one of their biggest irritations was when people, like on the cover of Time magazine, when they interviewed Sean Acker, a guy who did positive psychology with lots of Fortune 500 companies, and talked about happiness in the workplace, how it increased productivity, and there'd be less sick days and less employees stealing and things like that. But when they interviewed him for Time magazine, against his explicit request to not put a smiley face on the cover of Time magazine, they put a smiley face on the cover of Time magazine, right? And because it's not about that. It's in fact, it goes from in positive psych, it goes from living a pleasurable life to living a good life to living a meaningful life, right? And that's kind of what the goal is, not just this sort of superficial, because that you can do that with drugs and alcohol. You can achieve sort of, or even just the hedonism. You can just achieve it with hedonism. You can have a pretty, a lot of pleasures. But what they looked at was, there's something more than pleasure, and they call that the latest term I've heard, or it's been around for a while, is flourishing. What does a human look like? So so positive psychology is the study of flourishing, of what makes life worth living. They're scientists. They do what scientists do, which is, get this overview, and they look at the number of people. They get a bunch of people in the room, and they see who are the people with the greatest sense of subjective well-being, and what do they all have in common. Martin Seligman started the first positive psychology program, the MA, Masters of Applied Positive Psychology, at University of Pennsylvania. And it took off like a rocket. The first course that was taught at Harvard became the most popular course in the history of Harvard University.
So when somebody comes to you and says, hey, Robert, I really want to flourish, as we're going to use the word. I want to find purpose. I want to have meaning. I want to feel like I'm really doing things more than just pleasure seeking, something important that has deep meaning to me. How do you start with them, and how do you take them to learning about how to do that?
So I've always been interested in the mind. And when I did my first hit of LSD, in an instant, everything that my parents had taught me, all the downloads from my entire sort of blue collar, south side of Chicago, working class mindset, all that stuff was shattered. I immediately saw, this is true, in my very first trip, I saw, oh, wait, this isn't reality. This is one reality. This is one possible reality. And 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 so now I had this amazing tool for seeing other realities, for going places that I was not able to go before. Uh, and the only problem was that, like most people who've experienced these things, I know ayahuasca is all the craze now, and I get a lot of people coming to see me who've just done a bunch of ayahuasca and now have decided they want to change their lives. The difficulty with all of the psychedelics is integrating them back into your life.
Yeah, well, that's that's the B side of all that stuff. It just
That's
doesn't,
right.
it fails to like you say, integrate into daily living.
But it does give you a glimpse of what's possible, right? And and the Yoga Sutras even mention in the 4th chapter of the Yoga Sutras, they mention soma as one way to get to the top of the mountain. Soma is this unknown, mind-altering, we don't really know what it was, but it was a mind-altering substance that you would have these, this enhanced perception, or this, it would expand your consciousness. So this has been around for a while. People have been doing this sort of stuff, right? And so I loved the psychedelics. I moved to LA to become a screenwriter. I moved there for 3 reasons: to become a screenwriter, to study with J. Krishnamurti, who I had read his writings early on, and it was profound. It was amazing stuff. He was a great sage. And the 3rd reason was to get better LSD. I couldn't find any in the Midwest, so I moved out to California, and I started writing screenplays and studying with Krishnamurti and doing acid, and that sort of morphed into this cocaine. And so that led me to a kind of an addiction problem, serious addiction problem. I ended up going to rehab for a year. There's a 1-year rehab called Beit Teshuvah. And it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me, Bob, because I discovered therapy. I grew up in an Italian neighborhood where it was, you don't snitch on yourself. You got problems, you come to your family. Yeah, but what if my family is the problem, right? So I was taught never to snitch on yourself, never to ask for help. And so even though I was, great when I was high and dying inside, I would never ask for help until it was forced upon me. But I loved it, because now I'm back to studying the mind. Because, again, my interest in the mind, wow, therapy, that's what that is. And so I was in 5 hours of therapy, 5 days a week for a year, and 12-step meetings at night. And they asked me this most beautiful question, which I ask people today: what would you do? What could you do that would feed your soul? I had been doing yoga classes, those asana classes. I can't call them yoga classes. They're actually just asana classes. And then I love therapy. So these words came out of my mouth 26 years ago: yoga therapy. And I don't think it even exists. I think I invented it, actually. I'm not sure, but it wasn't a thing in America yet. It was in India, but it wasn't a thing here. So they said, sure, we don't know what that is, but we support it 100%. And they did. And so I went and got certified as a yoga teacher and started teaching yoga on Larchmont. And then, something happened though when I decided to become a yoga teacher. And I'll use another Sanskrit word, dharma. I found my dharma. And I'll use the positive psychology word. Here goes some synthesis. I'll use the same word in positive psychology is called calling. So you talked about meaning, for instance. In positive psychology, there's 3 levels of employment, right? One is a job. A job you just do for the money. They stop paying you, you go home. Next up is a profession. A profession is something that you're still doing it for the money, but it's got more prestige, maybe a bigger skill set. And then there's a calling. A calling is something that you would do if you'd never heard of money. It's something that you would do because it allows you to use your character strengths. right? And that is exactly what they meant by Dharma. And so when I found yoga, and particularly yoga, when I said yoga therapy, I wasn't kidding. I saw it as a healing modality. I found my Dharma. And when you find your Dharma, doors are flung open in your face. I got a scholarship for yoga teacher training, and then I met a teacher named Mark Whitwell, who was unlike any teacher I had ever met. He was teaching a workshop upstairs on Larchmont. I went up there, and so I've been doing 16 years of postures, pull up on your kneecaps and tuck your tailbone and focus on your alignment. And so Mark Whitwell came in and he said, so yoga is about relationship. And I went, what? And he said, and it's the basis for yoga. You have to know the Yoga Sutras. And I went, I'm home. And he said, let's do our little practice here. Everyone do your own practice. And I'm doing this sort of stiff, rigid, like getting my alignment just right. And Mark walks up to me, puts his hand on my shoulder and says, relax, Bob, just breathe. He says, how you feeling? And I just started to cry because in 16 years of asana classes, I was treated like an anatomical construct that needed to be micromanaged. And here's a guy who's talking to me like a human being. And he talked about this idea of lineage in yoga as opposed to styles. And I was hooked. So now he taught, all the things that I thought yoga was really about, relationships and lifestyle and feelings and the mind. And so I kind of followed Mark around for a while. And I used to, the way I couldn't afford all this stuff, so I would manage his workshops. And he was a New Zealander, actually. At the time, he was just new in America, and I took him all over America and booked his workshops for him. So I got to learn all this stuff. And I ended up going to India, and I went right to the source of where Mark had gotten his stuff, and met a man named TKV Deskachar. Anybody who's done much yoga or teacher training probably has read The Heart of Yoga, and found out that everything I knew about yoga was wrong. Yoga is a system, a complete system for personal transformation, for much of the same things that positive psychology is about, for finding the source of our confidence, wisdom, and joy, right? And so what I learned in India was that up until for thousands of years, only children were taught in groups. For thousands of years, and let this sink in, there had never been any such thing as a group class for adults. You would study as a kid, and at that first stage of life, they divided up into 3 stages of life. The first stage of life, it's all about the body. It is about asana. You're just trying to build a strong body and a sense of discipline. And your meditation is alignment. Not so much emphasis on the breath yet, because it's still too subtle. There's an emphasis on they use competition to get the young boys. And remember, these were young Brahmin boys who we're talking about here. And so they use group classes as a way to get people and kids are bulletproof. So you can have them balance on one leg and balance on their arms. And that's all appropriate for children. Now, when you hit the second stage of life, the householder stage, you're individuated. You have your own mind, your own body, in India, you had your own caste. And so now you went and found a teacher. And you had a relationship with a teacher that I realized pretty quickly was exactly like what we call a coach, a life coach. So you would meet a teacher who would get to know you, figure out who you were, what were your goals, what were your obstacles, there was really a relationship between the student and teacher. So when Deskachar, the title of that book, The Heart of Yoga, refers to the relationship between student and teacher. That's the living heart of yoga. It also refers to the Yoga Sutras, which is the foundation text, the heart of yoga. So classically, the The student would study individually with the teacher for the, until they didn't need the teacher, until they either outgrew that teacher or the teacher died. Imagine going to your doctor's office and there's 25 people in the waiting room, and the doctor says, everybody in my office. And then he goes, everybody, penicillin, or if it's a psychiatrist, everybody, Zoloft. Well, there's nothing wrong with penicillin or Zoloft, but is that why everyone, is that going to meet everyone's, is that why everyone came? Some people might be allergic to penicillin, so they fall out of a balancing pose. And so you would never go back to that doctor again. And yet we cram ourselves into a room and we get this sort of generic one size fits all sort of children's yoga, right? And in fairness, it fills one of the most important needs that we have, which is this need for sangha, for community. Because, we've given up our parents' religions and replaced them with social media and shopping and other isolative experiences. But to be in a room full of other warm bodies who all want something or have the similar goals or are moving in a positive direction, we need that like we need air, like we need water, right? So group classes do that, but at great cost, in the sense that people are injured in group classes. And it's like yoga is like a Porsche, and group classes is like driving it like an old Ford, because it's capable of so much more if you find the right teacher and you're the right student for that teacher and it's a good match. And at least that's I can only speak from my experience. When I found the right teacher, everything changed.
And where was that? In India when you were there?
In India, yeah. My teacher there was Deskachar's son. And also Deskachar he was mentoring his son at the time. So I got the benefit of 2 for 1, like a father-son sort of experience. And then the way it worked was the teacher, and this is what I do now, the teacher would give you a prescriptive personal practice. See, today that's called yoga therapy, but really that was yoga for adults. Inside of you, inside of me, there is like an inner GPS that's always whispering what will make you the most happy, what will bring you the more sustained joy. If yoga is psychology, Sankhya is the physics of yoga, meaning what's the nature of things that we're working with here. And so Sankhya says, okay, there's spirit, unchanging, formless, beyond time, but it's the source of all confidence, wisdom, and joy, and you can't kill it. It's always there. It's been there from the moment you were born. It'll be there in some form long after the body is not with us, right? But there's this other stuff called matter, which, as we know now, thanks to Professor Einstein, matter is energy. So matter/energy. So there's spirit, and then there's matter/energy. And the characteristics of matter, the material world, is that it changes, it has form, it goes from gross to subtle. And in yoga, gross means anything outside of you, subtle means anything inside of you. Like your car changes, and that's gross, it's outside of you and you're watching it rust or whatever it's doing right now. But also your emotions, your feelings about your car, they're also material. And because they have form, but I love I got a little Prius parked outside. Love my Prius. That love is it has a form. Love, it's like something. But here's the truth. It's changed. I hate my car now. I used to love my car. That's the real truth. So that feeling also changed, right? So now things change on the outside, things change on the inside. Everything changes, except the thing that never changes, the thing that's beyond time, beyond change, beyond form. Yoga means relationship, right? And yoga is the relationship between those two things, the thing that never changes and the thing and is always happy and confident and wise, it's a relationship between that. The Sanskrit word is Purusha. We would call it spirit or consciousness. So it's a relationship between that and matter energy, which doesn't have consciousness. Consciousness determines how matter changes. When we're not in a state of yoga, the changes are all based on past experience. In other words, my wife says to me, my wife's an Ayurvedist. She does, herbal medicine and stuff like that. So I say to her, honey, I have a cold. She says, well, then get some astragalus and some ashwagandha and get yourself to bed. Now, it's interesting. My mother used to kind of talk to me like that. She used to say, don't you tell me what to do. You just take your chicken soup, your Campbell's chicken soup, and go to bed. Well, my wife said something that my mind heard as what it had stored up, which was, I'm the boss of you. I'll tell you what to do. And so I responded not to my wife, but I responded to what sounded like my mother inappropriately and said, I don't need you to tell me to go to bed. I know I'm a 50-year-old man. I know how to take care of myself. Now I'm raising my voice. And guess what? Her father used to raise his voice. So now she didn't hear me. She heard dad. And she said, I don't need this either. I'm going to fly back to Australia. And this whole thing's not working out because my mother didn't agree with her father.
I love that stuff. It's, we're all puppets whose strings are being pulled by the past.
Yeah. Or, and along those lines, like all the stuff we downloaded, so from the third trimester, according to both yoga and positive psychology, we come into the world with our potential for happiness 50%. And this is argued, the exact amount is up for debate, but part of us is already preset, pre-programmed. We just come in that way. And certainly by the age of 6, we've downloaded all this stuff from our families.
Yes.
We were born, right? So Purusha, remember that spirit that knew everything, was born. Babies are full of confidence, not wisdom, but curiosity, which leads to wisdom, and joy. Right? There's no depressed babies lying around, right? So we come in that way, but then we download. The mind is in alpha state, and it just downloads all the stuff from the people we love. And because we love these people, our first education, Bob, is the university of our family, and we all got PhDs, right?
Oh yeah,
right.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the part that yoga says, okay, we need to have good old consciousness, take a look at that stuff. And a simple definition of what yoga is about, I could give you 10, but one of them is to make the unconscious conscious, right? So whether you do that through reflection or therapy or sitting quietly and asking yourself, gee, I wonder why I responded that way. That's what those are some of the tools. And yeah, okay, you're going to get that by stretching your back too, a little, but more in using the mind as a reflective tool to say what's really happening now, and what's the most appropriate response to what's happening. And we differentiate between a response and a reaction. See, I didn't respond to my wife, I reacted. Mm-hmm. And Viktor Frankl has a beautiful thing in his writing. He was the fellow who was a brilliant psychologist who was in the concentration camps, watched his whole family get wiped out in the concentration camps.
I read that book, Man's Search for Meaning, many years ago.
Man's Search for Meaning.
It was powerful.
Right. But I quote him often when he says things like, it's the length of time in between stimuli and response in which true freedom lies.
Yes.
And we would say it's that moment where I hear what she says, and then I go, okay, that felt weird. That sounded familiar. Oh, but wait, she's not my mother. She's my wife, and we're equals, and she's just trying to help.
The version that Eckhart Tolle uses is unconsciousness equals reactivity reactivity equals unconsciousness. So if we're able to extend that pause in between the stimulus and the response and live in there.
That pause you're talking about, the length of that pause, is cultivated partially through it's related to, or it's equivalent to, the pause that you create when in your practice between the inhale
Mm-hmm.
and the exhale. So now, if whatever stretching you're doing it breath centered, and you're aware of those pauses, you're inhabiting, you're hanging out during those pauses between inhale and exhale, that pause is the same pause between stimuli and response.
It's a physical manifestation of the reactive.
That's right.
I don't know if that be emotion or feelings or whatever you want to call it. So how
Yeah.
do you integrate? Let's get back to that, because let's say I come to you and I say, Robert, I'm really struggling with career transition right now. I don't know what I want to do exactly. I'm trying a few things. I'm feeling like I'm at a bit of a loss into which direction I'm going to go. And how would you work with me on that in a positive psychology situation?
The first thing I would do would be try to cultivate a relationship, because here's the other missing piece in yoga. And if you ask even any Western old school psychotherapist, they'll tell you, whenever there's a relationship between the client and the therapist, whatever modality they're using, it works better. In fact, the better the relationship, the more healing, the more powerful the work, right? So I'm not, you're not just number 7 today, my 7 o'clock appointment. You're Bob. So the first thing I'm going to ask you is, tell me why you're here, Bob.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm doing there technically is I'm asking you to set the agenda for our time together. Because I might have a whole nother, listen, and you can never guess your student's agenda. A woman walked in, she had to be 450 pounds. And she walked in, and I was a baby teacher then, and I said, so I guess you're here to work on your weight issue. And she said, and she said, what weight issue? I'm here for depression. I had to really backpedal, apologize, and restart the relationship. Can you walk in the door again? Let's try this over. And it's because the relationship's essential. See, and that's the other thing you don't get in a group class. I'll go back to that. But I want to get to know you. So Bob, what's your agenda? And you'll say, oh, my life's a mess. And I go, well, Bob, life's kind of big. So can we I'll divide it up into 3 categories: career, relationships, lifestyle. And lifestyle would be anything from education to your spiritual practices, travel, living situations, health. That's all lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
Career, right? And so I would say we can work on all of them, but where do you want to start? Because people go, oh, I got problems in all those areas, Okay, great. Well, where do you want to start? And I wait, I listen. I have to be a really good listener, which, because I like the sound of my own voice so much, isn't always easy. So go ahead, Bob, why are you here today?
Well, I'm at a little bit of a juncture in my career, and I'm looking to just figure out what is it that I want to do next. I'm a certain age now, and I want to, look at the last third of my life in a even a more positive way than I ever have, and how do I want to spend my days?
The next thing I would do is say, Bob, tell me what it will look like if our work together is successful. Yeah, Robert, we've been working together now for 6 months or for a year. And let me tell you about my amazing life.
Sure. I've clarified the things that are meaningful to me, that I'm enjoying doing, and I'm actually making a living at it. And I don't even think I'm going to need to even be coming here anymore.
Well, great. And that's my job. I tell people up front, a couple things. This work is front loaded. You got to come a lot in the beginning. And hopefully my job is to make myself unnecessary as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Right. And so I would say, I would ask what's called a powerful question. And in yoga, it would be called a pratipakshibhavana, an alternative perspective. I would say, so Bob, what would you do with your life if you had never heard of money, and if failure was not if there was no possibility of failure? That's called a powerful question, or a magical question.
Mm-hmm.
What would you do with your life if you'd never heard of money and failure were not, it was impossible to fail?
One of the things I would be doing is what I'm doing right now, is interviewing an interesting practitioner, because I love finding out new information and getting that those kinds of things out into the world.
And by the way, I just got an insight as to why you do these podcasts. It's to get free coaching, isn't it? Ah, okay.
Well, that's a side benefit. It isn't the reason I started it. In fact, the very first one I did was about death, because I wanted to start at the end. That was my thinking. I'm going to find somebody who does palliative care and end of life work. And that's what my first one was. And and it was really amazing, because you learn a lot about life through talking about death, which is a big area that most people do not even want to look at, including myself. Who wants to catch that?
Sure. No, definitely. What I found is I've gotten way more, hey, maybe there is reincarnation. Okay. So I would say when people come in with, like, I want to do more than one thing, I go, okay, let me ask you a question. Well, I'll do it with you. So if you could make all the money in the world and be as successful as you could dream, just doing podcasts,
yes,
but you could never do the other things that you might flirting with, or you might want it. You could never do those. Maybe for friends, you could write jokes for friends or whatever, but you could become a hugely successful by your terms at this. Would you? But never do that. Would you do it?
Don't know. I honestly don't know right now.
So let me wait before you answer. Then let me go. Okay, so if you could do, what's one other thing you thought about doing?
Producing comedy shows.
Okay, so if you could make, same question, if you could be as successful as imaginable on your terms, producing comedy shows, but never talk to never present, it looks to me like you like to present alternative, new ways of thinking and new ways of healing and being to the world. But you could never do that again, Bob. You can only produce comedy shows. You could never do what you're doing now, but you'd be hugely successful producing comedy shows. Would you do that?
Again, the same answer. I really want to do more than one thing, and I don't care about being hugely successful. I just care about having those things do enough that that I'm comfortable.
Okay.
The idea of hugely successful, that does come with a lot of money, I suppose. But even if I took the money out of it, I still I've always done 2 or 3 things my entire life. And I've had some rise to the top and be the major thing, but I've always played music on the side. I don't want to be a professional musician, although I did make my living at that for a number of years in my 20s.
Yeah.
And then I went into stand-up comedy, and that became the main thing, but I still played music. I always have drawn. I've always done cartooning. So I've always had these sort of artistic endeavors. So I always know I want it to be what I do in some sort of the arts. So if that's what it is, then yes, I can say it's got to be that. Not I don't want to go, be an accountant.
Now here's the good news. In some cases, you can actually do more than one thing. In other words, as long as they're not, I want to go be a doctor, a great surgeon, brain surgeon, and I also want to go play professional football.
Yeah,
which things have nothing to do with each other. You know what I mean? And they're both they require a pretty deep level of commitment.
Right.
They're essentially, you could divide your time between producing comedy and making some podcasts as well.
As you said earlier, when you start to do these things that are fulfilling, that it becomes easy because the universe recognizes that, and it becomes opportunities start to present themselves, and
That's right.
things start to happen.
But the catch, you have to be clear. You have to send out a clear signal to the universe in terms of, I definitely want to be this, not I might want to be this, but I might also want to be this. Doors don't open, or too many doors open, and I don't know which door to walk.
Well, that's probably where I am right now.
Yeah. Okay. And so I'm going to ask you. I'm going to give you a little coaching skill, a little coaching tip. We've got tools to change your DNA expression, to change your body, your mind, your emotions, your values, your breathing, your view of reality, and the way you talk. We have tools for all those things, and they're all connected. And the easiest thing to change is the way we speak, right? So if you ever, from now on, if you ever hear yourself saying anything negative about yourself, yeah, I always, I never finish the projects, or I always get myself confused like this, or whatever it is. I always get sick in the winter.
Yeah,
I just need you to add 2 words. So far.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Because that self-talk is pretty powerful, isn't it?
Or until now, it's the most powerful. It's amazing, because every time you say the thing you don't want without those 2 words, you just made it harder to change. It's beautiful, because I'm not asking you to lie and say, oh no, I never get sick in the winter, or one of those affirmations, which is 5% of you trying to convince the other 95%. Remember, Stuart Smalley, I'm beautiful, I'm people love me, and I always succeed, is 5% of you telling the other 95%, and the other 9% is going, bullshit, right. Bullshit. So this isn't an affirmation, it's the truth.
As you're talking about this, I can hear in my mind, my ego is going, this guy doesn't know me. I'm not going to do that. He doesn't quite get what I'm about. You keep doing what you're doing, Bob. It's all going on at the same time, and it's uncomfortable, and I'm sort of fighting it in my head. Like, I don't want to make a decision like that, because not even if it's the wrong one. Yeah, maybe that is the reason. What if it's the wrong one?
Yeah.
What if the other thing becomes the thing? And and I've usually always had something at the forefront that has been the strongest thing, and I don't have that right now, and I've been able to do other things at the same time. So I don't really have one that's like at the lead of energy focus.
Yeah. So what I would have you do then is send me a letter from the future. Dear Bob, it's been 6 months since we started working together, and I got to tell you about my amazing life. And then tell me what it is you do all day. Part of it's going to be the details, specific, the word, this phrase comes up with me a lot: positive, concrete, and specific. So when we talk about bhavana or visualization or goals, they've got to be positive, concrete, and specific. This is one of the reasons many people fail, is they have a negative goal. Well, you know what? You know what I want? I don't want to work in an office. You know what I want? You know what kind of partner I want? I don't want one who's controlling. Wait. You just said what you didn't. Like, it's like going to a restaurant and saying, I'm starving. Don't bring me a steak. I don't want a pizza. Or going to the travel website and typing in destination, not Detroit. I work with drug addicts and alcoholics a lot, and they're very negative. I don't want to I hate the 12 steps. I hate therapy. I hate people who have their life together, who think they have their life together. I hate authority figures. I hate people who think they know what they're talking about. Anyway, they know what they don't like, what they don't want, right? And so they're not really, they're kind of stuck. But the second part about being concrete as opposed to abstract. So concrete means, like, right now, you're somewhere doing something with somebody, right? Earlier today, you were somewhere doing something with somebody. Later today, you'll be somewhere doing something with somebody, right? Your whole life has been somewhere, something, somebody, events, behavior, stuff. You know what your life hasn't been, Bob? Grounded, centered, balanced, present, mindful, spiritual, right? Abundant. Those are all these goofy abstractions that plague the self-help yoga. You know, yoga teachers are like, yeah, well, I was grounded, but I wasn't centered. And then like my energy shifted, and then I was mindful, but I was present, but then I wasn't so grounded. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? And you can bleep that out, but I'm telling you,
leave it in.
That thing really, you know, and everything that bothers me the most is because I used to do it, of course, but you cannot achieve an abstract goal.
Yes.
If your goal is to be grounded, centered, and balanced, you can't achieve it. Here's the thing. It's an unachievable goal because it's not measurable. The same people, I've been in this, you know, new agey, self-helpy milieu for a long time. The same people who wanted to be grounded, centered, and balanced in the 70s, they're still wanting to be grounded, centered, and balanced. So it's an unachievable goal. It's an indefensible criticism. So whether you say it about yourself, God, I got to be more grounded, or whether I say it to you, hey, Bob, you know, since we've been doing this little podcast thing, I've noticed by watching your eyes that you're really not very centered. Go ahead, defend yourself. You understand what I mean? Yeah. Well, yes, I am. Yeah, no, that's what people always say who aren't centered. They think they are. That's
yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah, that's great.
And then, and because it's indefensible, you're open to exploitation. Because here's the good news. Even though you're not centered now, I'm doing a workshop this week on how to be more centered.
How much?
It's only $15,000.
Yeah.
And Bob, I can guarantee you, if you take this workshop, I can guarantee at the end of it, I will have your $15,000.
Yeah, and I'll be centered.
No, there's no way to measure that. But I can guarantee that I will have your $15,000. You understand?
Absolutely. That's great. I love that explanation of how people can get exploited that way. And it's really great.
You know, the church has been doing it for years with the abstraction of heaven.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Oh, they're brilliant.
The stuff I teach people every day who come see me are life skills. And they're things that, you know, to a person goes, man, why didn't I learn this when I was 9?
They don't,
you know,
that's the stuff.
No, because they didn't know it.
No,
they didn't know it. You know what I mean? So I call, for a while I was calling yoga psycho-chiro-respiratory reparenting. Right? Yeah. So I'm teaching you how to use your mind, your spine, and your breath in a way you probably should have learned, you know, that should have been modeled for you as you were in the room watching the gods and goddesses called mom and dad.
Can you imagine that being taught in elementary schools, you know, and starting very young?
Back to positive psychology. Positive psychology these days has 3 major areas that they're working. One is individuals. The other is institutions, and the other is education. So there's a school actually in Australia where Martin Seligman started a positive psychology program for kids.
Oh, I love that.
So we're talking, you know, younger preschool, you know, elementary school. So a positive psychology tool, they don't even call them tools, they call them interventions, would be like gratitude journal. One of the most famous positive psychology tests that have been done over and over again, repeated at Harvard and Stanford and University of Sydney, is they took 3 groups of clinically depressed people. And one group, they gave them, probably a 4th group that was a placebo, did nothing. But the one group, they gave them antidepressants for 6 months. Second group, a combination of antidepressants and talk therapy, standard, that's the standard protocol. And the third one, they had them keep a gratitude journal every night for 6 months. After 6 months, the gratitude journal people had a 40 to 60% decrease in depressive episodes over the other 2 groups in test after test after test.
Even without any kind of medication, you're saying?
No medication. No. And this is moderate to severe depression. Now, what's more interesting is they had all 3 groups stop whatever they were doing. 6 months later, the ones who had kept the gratitude journal earlier still had a 20 to 30% decrease in depressive episodes over the other 2. In my experience, people don't have a hard time achieving their goals. They have a hard time choosing their goals. But it means new behavior.
I had a guy call me last night, actually, and he was talking about how much he didn't like his new boss because he went to a corporation from being self-employed. And he was sort of just telling me about, the rules and all this stuff. And, I go, well, is the guy like just a nasty person who's like enjoying lording power over you? Is that the kind of guy he is? He goes, no, he's not. I said, has he been helpful at all? I don't know, I guess, I said, so here's what I want you to try. I said, go to this guy and say, listen, I wasn't sure when I came from a self-employed situation to a corporation how it was going to work for me because I wasn't used to it. But I want to thank you for all the help that you've given me since I've been here. And if I've done anything that doesn't really fit, I'm so happy when you tell me that. And I said, just give him a lot of you don't have to lie, but just look for the stuff. He goes, I go, and I go, I know you hate that. I know you hate that because I know you. Because I do. I go, do it anyway. Let's see what happens. He's going to call me tomorrow.
That's positive psychology at work.
Oh, okay.
That is you and yoga, because it's you asking him to choose to focus on something other than what he's been focusing on.
Yeah.
Right? Because what he's been focusing on is pushing him further away from this guy.
Yeah.
You're saying change what you focus on.
Thank you so much, Robert Birnberg, for that wonderful interview. The reason I didn't thank him actually on the podcast there at the end is his track somehow just went away at that point in the interview. But luckily, we were very close to the end. So I just want to make sure that you guys know I'm a polite guy, and I thank my guests. So I'm going to thank you again, Robert. And when I send this to you and you hear this part, you'll laugh. I know you will. And thank you, folks, for listening in. I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and we're going to keep going with more of these. So thank you so much. Have a good day.